Our next speaker will be Nare Kupelian. She's currently pursuing a PhD in intellectual history at UCLA. Her research is focused on ideology development in Armenian exile communities in Siberia during the 1940s and 50s. Her dissertation covers the various ideological shifts and communal patterns of Armenian repatriates in Soviet Armenia who are subjected to exile during the Stalinist repressions. Nare also holds a JD and has published works on the Soviet concept of law and legal framework of repression. She will be presenting on women in the political life of the Armenian Republic. Nare, welcome.
First and foremost, I would like to express my appreciation for being here with so many scholars and thinkers and community members to mark this very momentous occasion. Today, I want to speak to you about the distinct ways in which Armenian women during the First Republic engaged in social and political issues of this newly established republic, and in doing so, they acted as agents of social and political change. In aiming to recover the role of the Armenian woman during the First Republic, we need to determine if women challenged and redefined these traditional norms and the social limitations placed upon them by actively partaking in political life. Armenian women gradually achieved emancipation by their involvement in the liberation movement, which culminated in the formal establishment of the Armenian state. The First Republic was the first to create a truly gender representative and inclusive government. Women were given the right to cast their votes, but they were also allowed to run for political office as well. This was a very novel concept in the world. Most nations had not given women the right to vote, and most nations definitely did not have women elected representatives. I want to look at women's participation in political life on three fronts. One through domestic politics, through the members of parliament, of which there were three, and one through the international realm, through the appointment of the ambassadorship post of Diana Abgar and her work in the international refugee movement, and lastly, in the plight of women in the auxiliary roles they played, the roles of support for the Republic. It's difficult to give deference to all of these different realms, equal deference, so I want to speak about all of these different parts very briefly. So the culmination of Armenian liberation movement was the establishment of Armenian statehood. It is through this progression that women in the revolutionary liberation movements became steadily incorporated into political framework of the Republic. The 19th century marked the phenomenon of women's activism and evidenced by the emergence and development of women's social organizations. The impact that women left on Armenian communities is undeniable because in the 19th and 20th centuries, Armenian women established schools and preschools in capital cities and provinces. They trained teachers, they developed curriculum, they opened libraries and created periodical publications. They provided shelter and social services to hundreds of refugees and orphans and aided soldiers and created job opportunities for poor women. Women's activism was mainly triggered by several factors, but mainly the national liberation movement brought about a cohesive national identity, and there remained a need for the consolidation of that national identity. There emerged an increased public demand informed and emboldened by a specific national identity. Further, the spread of progressive ideals and the development of means of communication and humanitarian tradition all culminated in the rise of the women's involvement. The First Republic was founded due to the perseverance and valor of the Armenian people and its persistent leaders. The Armenian Republic had to contend with a starving refugee population, which had been violently thrust from its lands in Western Armenia. The Republic had to create non-existent state structures from the ground up, whilst protecting fragile borders against encroaching invasions. The progressive ideals that developed in the liberation movement regarding gender equality and equal representation became espoused within the framework of the Republic's constitution. The Republic of Armenia became one of the first in the world to give women the right to vote. Further, it became one of the first nations in which women served as elected leaders. Based on the results of the 1919 elections in parliament of the Republic of Armenia, out of 80 members of parliament elected, 3 were women. In a memorandum sent to the United States by the Special Mission regarding the recognition of the government of the Republic of Armenia, Hovannes Kachaznuni writes, "Every citizen in Armenia has full age has an equal right to participate in all elections without regard to sex, race, or religion." That's and right here in section 4 is the statement that was made. And in April 1917, Catholicus Gevorg Surenyanz issued an encyclical urging Armenian communities to respect the rights of women with regard to political participation in national affairs and their rights to vote for elected officials and to be elected into offices as well. Women's participation in various facets of political and economic affairs was essential for the development and progress of the newly founded republic. Now, possibly the most notable aspect of women's involvement in politics comes from the representation of the 3 female members of parliament. A quick note before diverging into who these women were and what work they carried out. When I was researching sources for this portion, I found it very particular that there were no real substantive biographies written of these women. I had to revert back to finding the biographies of their husbands and picking out information about their lives through the biographies of their husbands or their children. So even the volumes that had written bios of these women, they were very grandiose notions in there, very romantic ideals. Specifically, one of the MPs was Aram Manukyan's wife, and she probably dedicated her entire life to working in orphanages, but the entirety of her biography was about how she upheld and propagated for the memory of her husband. When you hear about the biographies that have come together here, keep in mind that these have come from sources that were not written specifically about these women, but they were extracted from sources that were very male-centric. The first of whom, Berjuhi Bardizbanyan Parserian. Berjuhi Bardizbanyan Parserian was born in Edirne in 1886, obtained her elementary and intermediate education under the tutelage of Rostom and Yekhsapet Zoryan. At a young age, she was driven into the liberation movement by witnessing firsthand the injustices waged against Armenians by Sultan Abdul Hamid. Through her involvement, she had the opportunity to meet and interact within revolutionary circles and meet revolutionaries, many of whom were returning to Edirne from Europe. It was early in these interactions with revolutionary figures that shaped her ideology and honed a steadfast vision for the future. Berjuhi met her future husband, Sarkis Parserian, at an age of 16 through her involvement within these revolutionary circles. She stated in her writings that she was always in awe of Sarkis's moral values and his exceptional nature. Once again, not from her biography, but through the biographies and the things written about her husband. When Christopher Mikaelian first met the young Sarkis Parserian in Lausanne, he told Avedis Aharonian, "There is a fearful fire in his eyes. He is born a revolutionary. Do not insist upon continuing his education. Do not burden this young man, and let him go." In cooperation with Sarkis, Berjuhi created a women's union that promoted the study of Armenian language, literature, history, and revolutionary ideology. This union for Armenian women became a sort of incubator that readied women for involvement in the national liberation movement. Her work with the union subsided after 2 years because she moved to Geneva and continued her education in literature and pedagogy. An avid writer, Berjuhi crossed genres and produced works under a pen name Edna. Her first collection of stories, titled End of the Storm, was published when she was still a student. And upon completion of her studies, Berjuhi worked as a school teacher in Van, yet this relatively peaceful period of her life came to an end when, after the 8th World Congress, Sarkis, as an elected member of Bureau, began to serve in Constantinople. At the outset of World War I, Sarkis and the other revolutions had the opportunity to leave Constantinople, but they chose to remain. And on April 24th, alongside numerous intellectuals and statesmen, he was also killed. Berjuhi, in the first time in her writings, she relayed grief, but the grief was not directed, her genre changed. Her grief became targeted towards the homeland. And in possibly the very first poem she wrote, targeting the homeland, aptly titled My Homeland, she stated, "I wanted to hate you, I wanted to curse this wounded homeland, to curse you in sorrowful days, in my lonely days, in the name of my fatherless child. Curse you for the rivers of blood that washed away all of my dreams. But you showed me your wound, your deep, lasting wound, and I, instead of cursing you, I cried for you, and I'm still crying for you." Upon the death of her husband, Berjuhi dedicated herself to her child, whom she referred to as the little spark left from her past. She relocated to Bulgaria with her son, and then went on to Tbilisi, where she became a teacher at Hovnanian and Gavanyan schools. She became deeply involved in revolutionary circles once again and relocated to Yerevan upon the formation of the First Republic and was elected a member of parliament. During her tenure as a member of parliament, she played an instrumental role in furthering the efforts of the Armenian Relief Committee, providing aid and services for refugees and orphans. After the fall of the First Republic, she relocated back to Bulgaria. Thereafter, she moved to Paris and ran the Nansenian office. But she continued to write, and in her novels, Arpiga and Loop in My Chain, she had the perfect blend of melancholy tone that was often juxtaposed with the strength and optimism of her characters, which so very often represented her own character. Varvara Varea Sahagyan was another of the three women to serve as an elected official in the First Republic. Varea, as she was known, was the wife of the first chairman of the parliament, Avedik Sahakyan, also known as Haid Abraham. Upon her election as a member of parliament, she was instrumental in the committee for developing educational programs, having a hand in charting curriculum and regulations regarding schooling. During her term as a member of parliament, her son fell ill and lost his life to typhus. Because there was a dearth of health care and there was a lack of medicine in the Republic, and because of this became a catalyst for her to become involved in public health initiatives and to champion that cause as well. After the Soviet Army occupied Armenia in 1920, Avedik Sahagyan and other national figures were sentenced to prison, and upon their release, Varea and her family, upon a span of 33 days, walked from Yerevan to Tabriz and relocated there. And soon thereafter, upon receiving an invitation from the Iraqi government, Avedik Sahagyan was an expert agricultural scientist, and he received an invitation from the government of Iraq to relocate there. But that was also a very short span because they moved to Lebanon thereafter shortly. This life of moving around after the fall of the Republic. But in Lebanon, Varvara played a vital role in the community as part of the Armenian Relief Cross in Lebanon. She was instrumental in refurbishing the mission of the organization and in instituting training component. Varea observed that in Lebanon, most of the women and girls who were affiliated with the Armenian Revolutionary Federation worked mainly through the Armenian Relief Cross. If this was to be the situation, she believed that it was vital that the organization institute educational programs for women and girls aimed at preparing them for public office and involvement within the political party. The Relief Cross did not only serve the purpose of providing relief and social services, but it became a breeding ground for work based solely on ideology. Along with her husband, Haid Abraham, Varea had a great affinity for the youth community and created initiatives to aid students and youth groups within Lebanon. Following the death of her son in 1932 and her husband in 1933, Varea passed away in 1934, leaving behind a legacy that stemmed as an elected official, spanned through many countries, became emboldened as a critical organizer within a diasporan community. Well, the last of these, one slide appears to be missing, but Katerine Zalian Manugyan, who went by the name of Katyusha, was the wife of Aram Manugyan, a doctor and an elected member of parliament during the time of the First Republic. Katrin was the wife of Aram Manugyan, and during her elected term, she served on initiatives to improve public health as a doctor, particularly in increasing access to medicine and proper care. As a doctor, she was dedicated to helping control disease among orphan and refugee communities. Upon the Russian army's retreat from Van, around 200,000 refugees flooded eastern Armenia. Further compounding this situation, a typhus epidemic broke amidst the shortage of doctors and medicine. Katerina Zalian worked relentlessly at a great sacrifice to herself and her family to aid those infected and control the spread of disease. It was in one of these orphanages that she met Aram Manugyan. They married in 1917 and had one daughter, Seta Manugyan. Seta was not yet 4 months old when her father contracted typhus and passed away in 1919. As the only daughter of Aram and Katrin Manugyan, Seda Manugyan said this about her parents' lives. Difficult year, hard work. My mother would spend all day in the orphanage. My father would be involved relentlessly carrying out political and community work. They were never able to carry out the normal family life that they both wanted. Aside from the service she rendered, Katerina created a nurses training program to give young women the skills necessary to work within local orphanages. A large number of women enthusiastically participated in these training programs and were embedded within hospitals and orphanages, mainly through a volunteer capacity. After the death of her husband, Katerina continued to render devoted service to the public. Even after the fall of the Republic, she chose to remain in Armenia, where her husband was laid to rest. Not long after, Bolsheviks terminated her from employment, citing her questionable connections. As an unemployed single mother, Katerina and her daughter were removed from their home, forcing them to live in great hardship. Eventually, they made their way to Krasnodar in Russia to live with members of Aram Manukyan's family. Nevertheless, in 1927, facing a shortage of doctors and an influx of disease, the Soviet government once again invited Katerina to come work in Yerevan. She accepted, and once they returned, the difficult living conditions continued because she was only provided a job, no housing, nothing else. In 1937, Katerina was once again removed from employment after 10 years because of claims that she was connected to and communicating with entities who were deemed enemies of the state. Her daughter, Seta Manukyan, stated, "My mother was educated, honest, devoted to her work and her profession. In the morning, she would go to her job, come and care after me, and then she would return to another job. But even after they terminated her, they did not leave her alone. They would consistently call on her, question her, inquiring her about her letters she was sending and receiving and what ties she had and with whom. Throughout all of this, what remained constant was the memory of Aram Manukyan and the devotion to the ideals that he represented. Katerina was concerned about protecting the legacy of her husband among the Armenian people, particularly with her own daughter. In 1937, the Yerevan municipality directors announced that the central cemetery where Aram Manukyan was buried would be replaced with a park. They gave the families with loved ones who were interned in that cemetery the opportunity to remove the corpse and bury it somewhere else. Seta Manukyan relays this story in her memoirs. "I was around 15 or 16 years old, and I was forced by my mother to go to the cemetery with her. She told me that I would see my father even if he was dead. He was buried in a coffin and the cap was shut tight, so his body was well preserved and mummified. Due to some neglect, the glass covering his face had broken off, and once the coffin was brought out, I was able to see his face. I was inconsolable, but my mother, calm and collected, uttered the same words that she would utter again to me while she was on her deathbed. I did not see it. I will not see it, but you will see it. It is impossible that the Armenian people will forget about the sacrifices that Aram made. It is not possible that he will remain unrecognized. Sooner or later, you will see it. You will see it." Katerina and Seta, they moved Aram's body to another cemetery locations, which is described in her memoirs as next to the current school named after Kamo. Thereafter, there was another announcement made saying that the area that he was now buried in was going to be turned into residential housing. Once again, mother and daughter went to the cemetery to exhume the father's body. Seta recalls her mother stating, "The city keeps calling for him. The city and its people yearn for him. We bury him, and the city once again asks for him. So we have to take his body and bury the body so far away that the city does not follow him and find him. How difficult it is that one has to be buried 3 times, but how much more difficult it is that one is so needed long after they are gone." Aram Manukyan was buried for the final time at the cemetery by Tokhmak Lake in Yerevan. After the burial, Katerina and her daughter placed a small tombstone at the site, and Seta recalls that her mother turned to her after the final funeral ceremony and said, "Don't lose this cemetery." Katerina's health declined thereafter, and she died in 1965 and was buried next to her husband at Tokhmak Lake. Until the end of her days, she remained loyal to the belief that she would fulfill her husband's bright ideals and she would ingrain his memory into Armenian collective history. Moving on to the international realm with the appointment of Diana Abgar as ambassador. Diana Abgar, whose real name was Anahid Aghabekyan, was born in 1859 in Burma as the 7th child of a family who hailed from Norjura. At a young age, her family relocated to Calcutta, India, when at that time there was a vibrant Armenian community. After completing Armenian school, she later continued her education at an English school and began to develop an interest in national and community work. Later on, she married Abgad Mikhail Abgadian, a notable Hong Kong-based silk merchant, and they settled in Yokohama in Japan, and they ran a company for import and export of goods. Diana wrote extensively about the plight of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. In 1909, following the Adana massacre, she began to draw attention to the plight of the Armenian people. She voraciously wrote essays, letters, articles, reached out to every notable world leader that she had connections to, and pleaded for compassion and action on behalf of Armenians. With the onset of the Armenian genocide, she turned her attention to securing funds and making connections through the American Red Cross. As the American Red Cross representative in Japan, she secured funds for Armenian refugees who had ended up in Vladivostok, Siberia, and Harbin. The funds were used to arrange travel to Yokohama. So the refugees would be brought to Yokohama. She housed and fed and gave them employment there. And thereafter, while waiting for the preparation of travel documents, she would raise funds for these people to be either repatriated to Armenia or sent to the United States. Stanford University recently published an entire archive of Armenians who made their way from Yokohama to San Francisco. And most of those people were aided through Diana Abgad's efforts. Archival records have presented a series of correspondences between Abgad and various representatives of the Armenian Red Cross, particularly manager of refugee relief, T.J. Edmonds. In this particular correspondence, Abgad writes, "I felt indeed very grateful and comforted to read of the hope you had set out in your letter that there is a possibility that the Red Cross would transport some of Armenian refugees to Port Said. At present, they are a burden on the Red Cross, and charity, which is at first bitter, afterwards becomes acceptable through familiarity with consequent deterioration of character. I think it is very demoralizing to be a refugee. So the sooner all of these poor people are sent home to earn their own living and to become self-supporting, the better for them." In 1920, after great effort expended by Abgad, Japan recognized the independence of the Republic of Armenia. And recognition of her efforts and in gaining recognition of the Republic, she was appointed to the post of ambassador of the Republic of Armenia to Japan and the honorary consul for Yokohama by Hamo Ohanjanyan, foreign minister at the time. On an international scale, Diana became the first woman to be given an ambassadorial post and to serve as an ambassador. In an appointment letter, Ohanjanyan writes, "It is well known to me that there is no one in the Far East who has worked as you have in the interests of our newly established republic and towards alleviating the troubles and sufferings of our fellow countrymen. It is also known to me that there is no Armenian in those far regions who has so much influence both with other nationalities and with our countrymen as you have. Therefore, I have appointed you consul of Armenia in Japan, and I hope that you will not refuse to accept this onerous office for the benefit of our newly established republic." Following the letter of appointment, the Foreign Relations Office of Armenia sent to Abgad the official coat of arms that was approved by the ministerial conference with requests that she use it in all foreign correspondence, and that's the coat of arms along with instructions on how to use it. On October 27, 1920, following this appointment letter she received, Diana Abgad presented her credentials to Kosai Inoue, the governor of Kanagawa Prefecture, writing, I have the honor to inform Your Excellency that the government of Armenia has appointed me honorary consul in Yokohama, and I pray that Your Excellency will be graciously pleased to present my credentials to His Excellency, the Foreign Minister, to confirm my appointment. Diana Abgad did extensive work in gaining international recognition for the newly founded republic. Fluent in both English and Japanese, she was able to publish widely in Armenian history and the history of the Republic of Armenia. Published mainly in international media outlets, Diana's writing gained international acclaim and were very well received. She wrote 9 political essays dealing mainly with the right of self-determination, using Armenia as an example. Abgad overcame the pressures of her time to become a respected leader in her community and a notable representative of the Republic. Her work is not only reflected in correspondences and international archives. Recently, the Foreign Ministry of Japan uncovered certain documents relating to the pressure that she had placed on the Foreign Minister's office to carry out some of the recognition work. I don't have much time to get into them, but one is a document pressuring the Foreign Minister office in Japan to ask and put pressure on the League of Nations about the mandate of Armenia. Another is one that brings Diana certainly into focus and it states, And it basically asks about the ratification of her activity, of her concrete activities there. So it's not just in the Armenian archives that we are seeing this, but the political pressure that she placed by reaching out to international world leaders, by publishing widely, had much work done within the Japanese government itself. And a quick note on the auxiliary roles that women played. Along with serving in official capacities as parliamentarians and ambassadors, the women also took on auxiliary support roles within the government in support of the Republic. These auxiliary roles were often offshoots of the work that was already being done within the National Liberation Movement, and it just became espoused with a new motive. One of these was Zaruhi Meghavorian Sareyan, who was very, very instrumental in running many of the orphanages within the Republic. Even after the Republic fell, she remained in Armenia and was eventually killed in exile in Siberia. Another particular story is between within the ranks of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation itself, Maro Stepanyan, who had responsibilities for the upkeep of the archives, and Sato Hagopian, who was responsible for carrying out several secret missions. In the archival materials belonging to Helen Puzan, she relays one story about the imprisonment of Sato Hagopian, who they called Tashnaktagan Sato. While Sato Hagopian was imprisoned, they imposed these interrogation tactics on her to force her to divulge secrets about her missions, and she continuously thwarted these attempts and did not release any information. So the commissar one day comes up with a scheme to trick her into submission, and he barges in and says, "Miss Hagopian, don't take too much pride in your confidentiality. We have found your archives. We have uncovered all of your secrets." And she so slyly, in a quippy sort of way, says, "Oh, you found it? What you have found must have been the Khatabala archives." And Khatabala was a satirical paper in Tbilisi, and she went on and on about how this commissar should go and follow exactly what was written in these archives because they would surely amuse him and offer many lessons for him. In conclusion, while continuing active work that is in these reciprocally connected realms of philanthropy, education, and health, the women of the First Republic were able to use the progressive state to expand the gamut of their involvement. The rebirth of Armenian statehood also meant that traditional norms became entwined with the communal, the national, and even the feminist at certain points. And I think it's very particular to note that, while I mentioned that there's a dearth of information, biographical information relating to women in the Republic, there are a lot of emotive aspects here that are easy to miss. It's easy to say that there is no concrete information about these people, but most of the sources that we have are coming from their children, are coming from their husbands' biographies. It's to say that a woman statesman does not only act within the capacity of being a state actor, she's also a mother and a wife, a mother who cares. And a lot of these women publish so many works that presents that struggle of their child living without a father, of their homeland struggling, and a lot of the problems that they face and the work that they did was deeply embedded within their own lives as well. Thank you. A few other images that we didn't get to. Here's Diana Abgar's official passport, diplomatic passport. She published extensively in Japanese and in Armenian and in English. Her with her granddaughters, and what a particular picture I found was tea ceremony with her and her husband, Abgar Mikhail. Thank you.
My question is for Nare. Nare, Garo Sasuni's wife, Lola Sasuni, was extremely active in the ARS in Lebanon, okay? I was wondering if she played any such role during the days of the Republic, if you're aware of it.
Not in the records that it's really difficult to point out individual women who might or might not have. What I've covered here is probably not even 10% of the people who had any role to play within the First Republic. There are many women in auxiliary roles which I did not even get to. So I'm very sure that she did, but Magere Soren to cover what we did here, this is just like 10% of it. There are hordes of women, and there's so many, so much material that we can go through to say, who played what role, but it's very difficult to point out each one. I haven't seen her name particularly in any archives, but I'm pretty sure that she's had some role.
Երեք ազգային խորհրդի ներկայացուցիչ 80-ի վրա այդ ժամանակաշրջանին ես ինձ գտվի որ գանանց ներկայությունը առաջին հարաբերության մեջ ցևական token representation չէր եթե այս այդ ժամանակաշրջանը բախտադեմ այսօրվա հարաբերության հետ շատ ավելի հարաճտիմական մոդեցում գտեսնամ գուզեի հասկանալ թե արդյոք ադերք ու ընդհանուր դպավորությունը
I definitely agree with you. I mean, if you look at the contextually, you look at the 3 representatives out of 80, at the time when women were not given the right to vote in most nations, that's a very novel concept. It's a very unique and very novel concept, and we became one of the first truly gender representative governments at that time. So I definitely agree with your sentiment.
Nare, you mentioned, other than Manukyan, whose educational background was medical, what was the educational background of the other 2 women that you mentioned?
Well, Katarina Berjui Bardizbanyan received instruction in Geneva in literature and pedagogy. So she was a teacher by training, and she taught in schools in Van prior to moving to Tbilisi. Varvara Sahagyan worked mainly in education planning, but there's no record of any formal sort of education. And Katarina Manukyan was a nurse and then a doctor.